For my presentation, I'll be focusing on a series of 12 books called The Saga of Darren Shan, written by Darren Shan between January 2000 and March 2004. The first three books, Cirque du Freak, The Vampire's Assistant, and Tunnels of Blood, were turned into a film called Cirque du Freak, The Vampire's Assistant, released in October 2009, written and directed by Paul Weitz. The premise of the story is Darren Shan and his friend Stephen attend a freak show where they meet Lawton Crepsley, a vampire. Darren is infatuated with Lawton's pet spider, Madame Octa, stealing her for himself. Eventually, Darren is turned into a vampire and Stephen a vampanese, their arch enemies, and they're both placed in a path to their very different but intertwined destinies. I first read and loved these books between the ages of 13 and 15, seeing the film shortly after having read them and thinking it was an awful attempt at an adaptation. But having watched and read them again, I now realise it's not as bad as I first thought, and here's why. Darren and Steve are played by Chris Masuglia and Josh Hutcherson, respectively. Both the characters are well cast, with Darren being a bit soft and a goody two-shoes, and Stephen a bit rough with a tough home life. Hutcherson is a tad corny in this role, but remembering it's a teen vampire film still does a good job. Lawton Crepsley is played by John C. Reilly, more commonly known for comedies rather than teen horror films. It is difficult to see John C. Reilly as anything but a comical double act along with Will Ferrell, and I think this works against him, as he's almost a typecast actor. But he does quite a good job of mixing comical with sinister. Reilly says that he was drawn to the character of Lawton because of the fact that it was a real person, that he wasn't some supernatural, mystical being that can turn into a bat. The powers weren't so extreme that it was just another thing altogether. This guy was a person who was alive in the 1800s, who was about my age. If you account the slow aging, he was 40 something. Despite the semi-successful casting of main characters, there are still some who are left wanting. For example, Gavner Pearl, played by Willem Dafoe, could have been omitted entirely and it would not have made a difference to the film. I believe he makes the film to highlight that there's a whole community of vampires out there and that they know one another and have a relationship. However, Gavner only appears in two scenes throughout the film and is completely forgettable. Perhaps he appears so little due to the fact that Gavner is not introduced to the books until a spin-off series was released focusing on Lawton's life before he met Darren. As well as Gavner, Madame Truska, the bearded woman, played by Selma Hayek, is also fairly unnecessary. She's able to glimpse into the future, usually seeing dark visions of pain and suffering. These visions don't ever lead to anything and are usually forgotten about after a quick one-liner, begging the question, why include them at all? The books are all written in first person, from Darren's point of view. There are even occasions within the books in which Darren breaks the fourth wall, stating, "My diary is my most prized possession, and it's because I wrote everything down in it that I'm able to write this book." In this regard, the film stays faithful, with use of a voiceover from Darren to narrate, often in a satirical manner. That's me. I'm Darren Shan, and this is my story. Oh, and trust me, spending this much time in a coffin was never part of my plan. This is stylistically similar to the books. My name's Darren Shan. I'm a half vampire. I wasn't born that way. I used to be ordinary. I lived at home with my parents and younger sister Annie. I enjoyed school and had lots of friends. I think sticking to this style of narration is successful as it aligns us with Darren immediately, much like in the books. Due to the nature of this adaptation, three books combined into one film, there are aspects that have been removed entirely, added, or altered slightly. For example, in the third book, Tunnels of Blood, a Vampanese character called Murloch kidnaps Evra, a snake boy from the circus, luring Darren and Lawton down into the sewers to get him back. In the films, this has been changed to Darren's family and his love interest being kidnapped and held hostage in a theatre. I don't think this approach is particularly effective as it results in Darren's family finding out he's still alive, and instead of seeing that play out, Lawton simply gives him a potion which makes him forget the entire event, much like the neuralizer in Men in Black. I think this change was made to increase the stakes, Darren's family being killed rather than a new friend. As the storyline progresses further into the books, less material is used. This would suggest to me that the filmmaker has bitten off more than he can chew, and that adapting three books into one storyline is too much for the film to be able to deal with effectively. Set decorator David Smith and production designer William Arnold have worked with Paul Weitz before on American Dreams, In Good Company, and The Little Fockers. They do a very good job of creating a viable film world, especially at the circus. Each freak's living quarters are tailored to their needs and mirror their freaky personas and abilities. For example, Larton's tent has a coffin, which isn't particularly surprising, but the tent itself is designed to look like a giant spider, a paean to his beloved pet, Madame Octa. Evra's tent is equally impressive. As well as being a snake boy, he is a keen musician. His tent has green silk walls, a large drum set, and a huge terrarium. A merman has a large aquarium complete with a shell covered throne and table. The set design is of a high quality and very effective in drawing the viewer into the film world. The circus camp was inspired by 1920s and 30s German Expressionism. Paul Weitz said that Darren discovers a place that's far more visually captivating and ethnically diverse than his pastel saturated suburban home. The German Expressionist painter's vision was dark and somewhat humorous, but also incredibly colourful. That was part of the reason I wanted to make the film, to do something that was gothic but completely packed with colour. As well as being adapted into a film, the books have also been adapted into a series of manga novels illustrated by Takahiro Arai, published by Yen Press and first released in June of 2009. Unlike the film, the manga novels only attempted to adapt the books one at a time, allowing them to stay much more faithful to the plotline. The depictions of the characters in the manga series are much truer to the books than they are in the film. Each character looks spot on for the image that is depicted in your head when reading the books. The manga series is also as dark and as twisted as the original novels, featuring close ups of the huge spider, plenty of blood, and twisted, deformed characters. This is a key component in this adaptation being successful. It really leans into the horror aspect of the story, not shying away from the blood and guts, something that the film does not do particularly well. As well as staying faithful to the theme of horror, the characters are very introspective, similar to the books, as is made evident given that Darren keeps a journal. However, this is also something that the film does well. In one scene, when talking about having his heart broken, Larden states, I saw her 6 years later. She looked like an old crone, but my heart still beat like a jackrabbit. Have you ever had your heart broken? Then maybe you could be a little more sympathetic. All in all, I think the film's adaptation of the books is really lacking. Considering it's meant to be a horror, it's not particularly scary, even by a child's standards. Paul Weitz has also attempted to compile too many of the books into one film. It's probably this that is the biggest failure of the adaptation, having to cut plot points and characters out while splicing others together ineffectively. The film had a budget of $40 million and went on to only draw $39 million from the box office. This will have been one of the main factors that resulted in the three planned sequels being cancelled. However, having said this, the set design is probably the most successful part of the adaptation, having come up with a believable and authentic film world. In my opinion, the manga novels are a much better attempt at adapting the books into another form of media, sticking much more closely to the storyline, staying true to the character's description, and leading into the horror theme has evidently paid off.